welcome, fellow patriots. I wanted to get on and talk about the latest news and information regarding the Fed and what Jerome Powell just did. Um, as you probably already know, the Fed has just cut another quarter point from the Fed's fund rate.
In support of our goals, in light of the balance of risks to employment and inflation, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to lower our policy interest rate by a quarter percentage point. As a separate matter, we also decided to initiate purchases of shorter-term Treasury securities solely for the purpose of maintaining an ample supply of reserves over time, thus supporting effective control of our policy rate. I will have more to say about monetary policy and its implementation after briefly reviewing economic developments.
And now this was a split decision. This was a 9-3 split decision. You had two people who did not want to change the Fed funds rate. And then you had Trump's guy, who Trump put in there, Stephen Moran, who actually didn't want a 25 basis point cut, but rather a 50 basis point cut. And, you know, the thing about it is that, Trump has been pressuring Powell to lower rates and to get the printer printing again, to inject into the economy more monetary stimulus, right? Basically monetary methadone. And the thing about it is that the Fed is not only this time lowering the rates by a quarter point, but the Fed is also they are going to immediately start purchasing short-term T-bills. Now, back in after the financial crisis under Ben Bernanke, we started a program called QE, which is quantitative easing, which is essentially another way of saying we are going to create more inflation, right? Because the last thing that the Fed wants are for prices to go down, right? The politicians absolutely hate when prices go down. As a matter of fact, I was watching a panel. I was flipping to see the reactions on Fox Business, CNBC, CNN, Fox News, and literally every panel that went on there were a bunch of Keynesians who were like, oh, God, no, we don't want prices to go down. We just want them to stay where they are. Well, if you were somebody who is living check by check, and you were somebody who's on Social Security, right? Somebody who is just getting by, you don't want prices to get where they are, right? You want prices to come down, right? And, the fact of the matter is that our country, during the entire 1800s, okay, prices fell the entire century. And during that time, we had the greatest prosperity, upward mobility for our country anywhere in the world. That is when we had the Gilded Age, right? The Industrial Revolution, right? All these new inventions were coming out and they were being made right here in the United States. Why? Because prices were going down. People had savings, right? People were able to invest in land, labor, and capital, okay? Right now, Americans are struggling, right? The trade deficit is falling, right? But not because we are producing more goods and services. The trade deficit is falling because we can no longer import the cheap stuff that other people make. So what's happening is a lot of Americans are trading down in their lifestyle, right? They're going, they went from steak to hamburger meat, right? Then to macaronis, right? That's the direction that Americans are going in. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of people this year who are going out buying Christmas gifts and all of that are going to have a record number of people going into debt to do it, right? They're going to rack up their credit cards. They're going to borrow money, buy here, pay here, all of this stuff in order to have Christmas. Now, my advice to people who are living check to check, just give a Christmas card, right? Don't go into debt buying stuff that is going to end up in the probably in the heap pile, right? The trash pile by next year. Buy what you can afford, right? Give your kids and grandchildren the gift of prosperity, right? Give them the gift of financial safety net, right? They know when their parents and grandparents are struggling, right? And they don't want to feel bad receiving a gift knowing that you're pinching pennies, right? So teach them good fiscal habits, good habits, financial habits, save your money, right? And buy the things that you can afford. And I really stress that, especially with younger people, right? Who have never lived through a downturn, right? Because we definitely are going to have a downturn that's coming. And it's caused directly because of fiscal and monetary policies coming out of the Fed and the federal government. Now, I want to talk about where inflation actually comes from, because I see a lot of blame going back and forth regarding inflation and whether or not the inflation is Trump's fault or if it's Biden's fault, right? And every so often I'll see something for Obama, right? Barack Hussein Obama, right? And, the truth of the matter is, if we're being intellectually honest, so I wanted to get into and explain, I've explained a couple of times on this channel, but for my newer viewers and listeners, I want to explain exactly where inflation is created and where it comes from, because there's a lot of blame and finger pointing at both parties, right? The Democrats are blaming Trump. The Republicans are blaming Biden. And the truth of the matter is that if we're talking about fiscal responsibility, right, neither party has been fiscally responsible my entire life, right? We've had little spurts at times where the government would try to cut something, but overall, the government has grown exponentially under both parties. So let's get it out right now that both parties are responsible for the $38 trillion in deficit spending. As a matter of fact, I just seen a report that came out regarding the Pentagon. Now, the Pentagon has failed multiple audits, okay? They don't only fail them, they actually refuse to do them. And how did both parties reward the Pentagon? By increasing their budget, right? See, instead of punishing the Pentagon and saying, look, every year you don't follow through with the mandated, this is mandated by Congress, right? That they do an audit. That what we're going to do is we're going to cut 1 to 3% of your budget every year until you guys get your fiscal house in order. But instead, not only did the current Congress give the Pentagon more money, but they actually gave the Pentagon $8 billion more than what the Pentagon was asking for. So, I mean, just think about that. Think about your financial situation. Look at the financial situation of the government and ask yourself, do we have an extra $8 billion lying around to give the Pentagon? This is what I'm talking about. And this was voted in by both parties, okay? This is the stuff that is driving us into the poorhouse as a nation. Because the thing to understand is that government spending is a tax, okay? So whatever the government doesn't tax you, honestly, they will tax you through inflation. So now you ask yourself, well, how is the government able to spend money that it doesn't have? Well, one way is we borrow the money. And what we do is, because of the dollar's reserve currency, we're able to create treasury bills out of thin air, okay? Then we sell those T-bills around the world. Okay, so we sell treasuries around the world. And what happens is foreigners buy our treasury bills. And then what they do is they end up buying the stock market, buying real estate, right? They end up investing more in their own economies, okay? What do? We take the new printed money to buy the stuff that they create. In business, we call that vendor financing, right? So basically, the vendor, who are the foreign countries like China, Japan, right? Europe, Brazil, they buy our treasuries. They loan us the money, and then we turn around and buy their stuff, okay? And this cycle has been going on for decades, okay? It just didn't start under Biden. It just didn't start under Trump, okay? This has been going on for about 50 years like this, okay? And then the other way that the government is able to spend more than what it takes in is from the Fed printing up a bunch of money, okay, and monetizing the debt. And that's exactly what this is, right? So you have the government creating treasury bills, T-bills. The Fed goes into the market and buys a bunch of T-bills, so then the federal government can go out spending, okay? And we call that monetizing the debt. And that is pure inflation, okay? Inflation, by definition, if you had a Webster dictionary in the 1970s, inflation is an increase of the money supply and credit. And the reason why people like myself believe in gold and the gold standard is because if you were on a gold standard, the government couldn't just create T-bills out of thin air, okay, and have the government print up a bunch of cash to pay for it. If you were on a gold standard, what would happen is, in order to create that T-bill, you would have to have the gold, right? You'd have to show, hey, you have something to back that T-bill. And what that did was, for two centuries in this country, when we were on a gold standard, was it kept a lid on the government spending. And then what happened was, after World War II, okay, and, you know, then we got into Vietnam, right? We went to the moon. We had the war on drugs, the war on poverty, all these new government programs. Medicaid, Medicare was created. And our foreign debt holders, right, the people who were loaning us money back then, were questioning and saying, hey, wait a minute. How do you have all of this gold, right? Because remember, back then, if a foreign country bought a T-bill, a bond, it was backed by gold. So it was actually France that called our bluff and said to Nixon, hey, Nixon, we don't believe you have the gold. And we want to exchange our bills, our T-bills, for gold. And that sparked a massive run on the T-bills. Because then other countries started piling in saying, hey, wait a minute, I better get my gold now before it's too late. And at that time, Nixon had a choice. He could have done the right thing and said, okay, we have to cut spending, right? We need to tell seniors, hey, we can't give you 100% on your check, right? Maybe we'll give you 95%. We needed to come clean on our foreign debt and tell them back then, hey, look, we can give you 90 cents on the dollar, okay? Or push out the loan with a balloon payment left later on, right? We could have done a lot of different things, right? We could have cut back on all the wars and programs, right? But instead, what did Nixon do? Nixon took the easy way out. And every president since Nixon has taken the easy way out. And if you go back to Nixon's speech in 1971, he even talks about, he says, look, this is a temporary measure. Well, we're now past 50 years of this fiat currency, because when you remove the gold, it's no longer money, it's now a fiat system. And Nixon stated that a dollar today will be the same dollar worth tomorrow. And if you're from the 70s, 80s, 90s even from the 2000s, that's not true. And since Nixon did that, we have now lost better than 99% of our purchasing power. Now, mind you, it took two parties to destroy the dollar, right? It took two parties to rack up $38 trillion in debt. So I am not a partisan in this issue, okay? If you care about seniors, if you care about the working man and woman, right? You have to think prior to Nixon taking us off the gold standard, women got to stay home, right? They didn't have to work, right? The man could go out, get a job, and afford to, they had 3 to 5 kids on average, right? And they could afford a good lifestyle. As a matter of fact, my grandmother went to college and got her master's degree. And it was $250 a semester, right? That's it. That's all it was. You didn't have to take out a loan. You didn't have to go into perpetual debt. Most people, when they bought a car, they didn't take out a loan, right? Mortgages were housing was extremely cheap. Rents were very affordable. And then what happened was we went off the gold standard and prices started to go ballistic. And prices have never gone down since that mark. Now, the Fed comes out back after the financial crisis in 2008. They start QE. And back then, Ben Bernanke said that this will be one and done. And I was saying back when Ben Bernanke was Fed chair that this won't be one and done, that we will have more QE programs than Rocky movies. And so what happened was we had QE1, QE2, QE3, QE4. And then we had COVID. And then all this money printing. 87% of every dollar that was ever created in the history of the dollar was created during COVID. Okay? All this money was thrown into the system. Okay? And both Trump and Biden acted recklessly when it came to spending. And unfortunately, Trump took the baton from Biden and is acting recklessly still with spending, as I pointed out with the Pentagon. And it's not just Trump or just Biden. It's Congress in both parties that have allowed this nonsense to continue. So anyway, Trump is out there campaigning, talking about affordability as a hoax. It's a Democrat hoax. But the people know that it's not. And the fact of the matter is that Trump's ratings are the lowest in ever. His ratings are down to Herbert Hoover levels. Because Trump is making the same mistake that Biden did when Biden was in office. When Biden was telling everybody, oh, things are so affordable now, inflation's gone, this is the greatest economy ever, the people knew it was bullshit. Now, you have Trump doing the same thing. Prices have gone up, and yet here you have the second administration in a row talking about how prices are not going up, this is a big hoax, and everybody's doing great. Well, if everything was doing so good, then you wouldn't need this much fiscal and monetary stimulation, right? You wouldn't have to hand the farmers another farming welfare check. Now, mind you, in Trump's first term, Trump handed out a farming welfare check to the farmers. Now he's doing it again. So you've got administration after administration constantly giving what I call farming welfare to the farmers, okay? And what I've been saying is that the last thing the farmers need is more farming welfare, right? What they need is more freedom, right? Like, the best thing we can do is to shrink the size of government and get the government off their back and off of all of our backs. If Trump truly wanted to liberate the farmers, what he would do is remove the Department of Agriculture. The fact of the matter is, I could guarantee that farmers were much more prosperous before we ever had these departments than they are now, right? And again, it's all the central planning, all of this nonsense that we can't allow prices to go down, right? That is all a bunch of BS. And so, giving the farmers more welfare is not actually solving the problem. The problem is the cost of living. The problem is the economy. The problem is all the central planning that is taking place in this administration and prior administrations. Now, when the Fed announced that they are going to start QE, the markets reacted, and I want to look into the markets and see what has happened. So, looking at the Dow was basically flat on the week. It looks like it was up 1% on the week. Looking at the S&P, the S&P was down 0.5% on the week. Gold had a great reaction. Gold is up $91 on the week. Okay. Silver is up 6% on the week. Silver is now $62.03 per ounce. Okay. That's incredible. That gold and silver are telling the Federal Reserve to stop printing and stop monetizing the debt. Okay, if there was ever a signal to the government to stop what they're doing, it's what gold and silver are doing, and the precious mining stocks, which are all up. All the precious mining stocks are up 2 to 5%. Now, how is Bitcoin doing, right? Bitcoin is supposed to be the digital gold, right? Well, Bitcoin is actually down on the week, right? It's down, I believe, about 1%, landing at $90,198, right? But more importantly, Bitcoin is down on the year about 3.5%. And you got to think, that is with the crypto president, right? That is with Congress being very favorable to Bitcoin, right? That is with all the Super Bowl ads, CNBC round the clock coverage, Fox Business round the clock coverage for Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is down, on the year, if you held Bitcoin all year. So it is clearly not digital gold, right? And where you need to protect yourself is to put your savings into the precious metals market. That would be my advice. My suggestion. I don't give advice. I'm going to give this suggestion. And so look, so I wanted to come on and talk about that. Another thing I wanted to talking about prices, and Trump out there talking about how strong the economy is while he's going to bail out the farmers. And now I seen Caroline Levitt was talking about handing families a $2,000 check, right? If things were so good, you wouldn't need to hand out all this money, right? You wouldn't need all this stimulus, right? You wouldn't. So let me put it like this. Strong economies pay down deficits. Strong economies build savings and produce more goods. We have basically been in a manufacturing recession over the past 18 months, okay? And that is because people who hire are having a tough time hiring, just as people who are looking for a job that pays well are having the same trouble. So anyway, I wanted to talk about a personal story that I can tell you that shows that, first of all, that the inflation rate that the Fed puts out is a bunch of BS. And to show how prices are going up for the average American. Now, I have employees, and every year, what I like to do, I'll stick some cash in a card, right? Give them their bonus, and I'll have a Christmas party. And since moving to South Carolina, what I like to do is I will rent a venue in a hotel, and we'll have a party. And we'll get rooms, and there'll be food and drinks and entertainment. And this year, I have less people working for me, right? There are people that have retired. There are people that have moved on. And I myself am not looking to take on more employees, right? I'm looking to trim myself, right? And so this year, I have 4 less employees. Okay, so I have 4 less employees to pay for food, drinks, entertainment, everything. Okay? Yet, the bill for this Christmas party is up 33%. Okay? It's literally the same DJ that I had last year, the same people that do the service of food and all that. I forget what they're called. Caterers. Okay, I use the same caterer. I have the same DJ, right? These are people that I now know. Renting the room, right? The venue in the hotel, right? All of that. I have less people, and the cost is up 33%. Okay? And this is not just for me. This is for everybody. And, so when they give you those fake numbers, oh, inflation is down, or it's 3%, and then you get your homeowner's insurance bill, or your rent goes up or your car insurance goes up. Like, I right now have my homeowner's insurance. That bill, now last year, right, my homeowner's insurance went up 22%. This year, okay, because I just got the bill, okay, went up another 18%, right? So only government would say, oh, well, look, I mean, that's better than 22%. Yeah, but it's worse than last year, right? Because I had a 22% increase. And now that new amount needs another 18%. And I am somebody who pays on time, who's never had a claim. And this is not just my story, this is everybody's story. So what happens is people like me, businessmen and women, who want to, I'm old fashioned. I like Christmas parties. I like that sort of thing. I like taking out my employees and having a good time, right? And showing them how much I appreciate them, right? And I don't just show them once a year. I show them every week, right? Making sure that they can make a damn good living. And I'm thankful that I have always been able to give them a really good living wage that allows them to afford their homes and their lifestyles, right? But what's happened is, because of fiscal and monetary policies of the government, because of all the inflation created, because of all the tariffs, right? I deal with a lot of aluminum and other supplies that have gone up exponentially. That now, when I have an employee retire or, just decides that's it, I'm done, right? Leaves for whatever reason, I'm not eager to replace that person, right? Because the cost is so high on me now, right? And that's what's happening to small businesses around the country. A lot of businesses are having to tighten their belt, especially smaller businesses. And the ways that they tighten their belt is by having less people. That is one way. If you can afford to get rid of somebody, or somebody leaves and you don't have to replace them, that is one way to save money. So that's what's going on. And I wanted to share that story with you guys. Also, another story, if you didn't know already, I changed the name of my channel. What happened was that when I created my channel, I did not realize that somebody else had the same name. So what I did, I was wondering, I'm saying to myself, why is my channel not catching fire? I mean, I feel like I put out good information. I feel like I'm different than a lot of other people who do this type of work. And I give a perspective that you don't really see out there, right? Where I talk about freedom, liberty, right? Individualism, right? I teach about less government, right? And I hold both parties accountable, right? But why isn't this catching fire? And then I realized recently that somebody else had the same name. So now I changed the name to Broom Space Media Space Productions. And that's my new name. And I'm excited to see what happens going forward. Now, when you put that in the search bar, I'm by myself. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to this new year that's coming up. Also, my goal is to put out new episodes every Thursday. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hit the notification button. You're going to want to hit the notification button in case there's breaking news or there's some other information where something happens and I jump on and throw out. Sometimes I like to do an extra video. And so hit the notification button. Also, I am so close to being able to go live on YouTube. Look, a good Christmas present is the present of education, right? If you like this program, please subscribe. Look, if become part of the 1%, right? You see how Bernie Sanders and them, they rail against the 1%. I want you to become part of the 1%. So if you are 1% smarter, please hit the subscribe button. Please comment. Comment as much as you want, as much as you can, right? We need to get the algorithm up. I need you to smash the like button for me. Anyway, fellow patriots, I appreciate you and thank you for your generosity in spending time with me. And I always promise to stand up for liberty, freedom, and of course, sound economic policies. Stay strong, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.